Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Core studio. Welcome to the show. Okay, I feel like I've just been running around since yesterday later in the day because my goodness, there are just crazy things happening right now. There was a massive pre-con leak yesterday with like 20 cards or something. Jolene's in there, so is Benny Brax. Both are going to be, I think, very popular commanders, so make sure you check out that episode. And of course, even more leaks have been coming. Like probably one of the biggest leak cards we've ever gotten with Smuggler's Share. My goodness, this card is going to be expensive. I mean, I don't know if it's going to be Smothering Tithe expensive, but this card is definitely reminiscent of something like Smothering Tithe. This thing is going to be incredibly popular, and yeah, you gotta check that one out. Speaking of which, you also need to check out my episode on Denry Klin, Editor-in-Chief, and yeah, it literally took me about 2 or 3 seconds to break this commander right away. But don't go check out that episode just yet, because it finally happened. The perfect commander has finally come for one of my decks, and oh my goodness, I am so excited about Lagrella the Magpie. What is a magpie? Isn't magpie is a bird, right? Regardless, that's not important. What is important is that I'm excited about this commander, and that, well, I keep saying blame Eddie, but please thank Eddie in the comments below for all of his hard work during spoiler season. He's always a great help. But also, blame Eddie if I make any mistakes. Anyways, let's jump into it. I am just loving all the uncommon commanders from this set. There really isn't anything uncommon about them, and yeah, Lagrella is no exception. Lagrella is a 2/3 human soldier that costs green, white, blue. Now, the text on this is pretty confusing, and I'm not the only one who's been confused by it, but I'll walk you through after I say it, okay? When Lagrella the Magpie enters the battlefield, exile any number of other target creatures controlled by different players until Lagrella leaves the battlefield. When an exiled card enters the battlefield under your control this way, put 2+1/+1 counters on it. Now, I don't know why. I'm sure there's a reason why they wrote it in this seemingly convoluted way, but it's a lot easier to understand just by saying, hey, when this comes into play, exile up to 1 creature per player, and then when this leaves play, they come back, and then your creature gets counters on it. That's basically the gist of this commander, and if you've seen my episode where I built a deck completely around this kind of a concept, well, I never envisioned that they'd actually make a commander that works perfectly in it and utilizes essentially the exact colors that I want for that commander. Now, before we get further into how I'm going to build around this commander, and yeah, I'm definitely building this deck, let me just get you up to speed really quick on what episode I'm referring to and the concept for that deck. Okay, but I keep forgetting things really quick, though. Like all the other episodes that I've been doing during spoiler season, or at least most of them with the quick takes on commanders, I've included a link in the description that includes a list of the cards I'm talking about on this episode. So if you too are excited about this commander and might want to pick up some of those cards sooner rather than later, go for it. Again, sometimes when exciting new commanders are spoiled, some cards do go up in demand. So that episode with this very strange looking thumbnail is what I like to call my Hunter Tribal deck, or Fiend Hunter Tribal deck. And yeah, it's pretty off the wall. It's essentially based off and I only played Modern for a good 5 seconds because I tried building a budget deck and got just absolutely obliterated. But yeah, the budget deck that I did build has this concept where, well, I'll show you now with some cards. It's built around these kind of Fiend Hunter effects. Now, Fiend Hunter is a 1/3 human cleric that costs 1 white. It has, when it enters the battlefield, you may exile another target creature. When Fiend Hunter leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Now, the goal for that deck is essentially in a couple of different ways to get multiple effects like this going on so you can essentially loop them. Because obviously in other formats, again, let's just go with the example of Fiend Hunter. If you've got one Fiend Hunter in play, then you play another one, you can exile that Fiend Hunter. Then if you get a third Fiend Hunter in play, well, then you can exile the Fiend Hunter that was exiling another one. Then because that other Fiend Hunter gets exiled, the one that was in exile comes back, and then that can exile the other Fiend Hunter. And that might sound kind of confusing, but basically you can just keep exiling your Fiend Hunters again and again and again, and you get infinite ETBs and infinite LTBs. So if you've got any other triggers from that, other things on the battlefield, then those go infinite. Now, actually, of course, I was able to translate this into a commander deck, and it's a very spicy deck, again, with that episode. But with the commander that I chose for that deck, the commander choice was kind of somewhat in flux. There were a good amount of decent commander options, but no real perfect commander for the deck. But now, with Lagrella the Magpie being essentially the ultimate Fiend Hunter, yeah, this is happening. Because now we've got a 3-mana Fiend Hunter in our command zone that can also exile our opponent's creatures too, and that is relevant, and I'll talk about why as well. And actually, those two counters that Lagrella deals with can be important too. So that said, let's dive into this concept. Now, of course, we've got a ton of Fiend Hunter type effects on creatures with things like Wormfang Drake, Changeling Hero, and Yannick. Now, the way these work kind of vary, but the concept is the same. And yeah, when you're searching for these, make sure you're trying different kinds of searches because they can be a little wonky and different in how they work. First up, how about Wormfang Drake all the way back from, I think that's Judgment, right? I used to play way back then. Yeah, what a great set. Anyways, when it enters the battlefield, sacrifice unless you exile a creature you control other than Wormfang Drake. And when Wormfang Drake leaves the battlefield, return the exile card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So initially, I'm sure this was meant to be a downside, on this 3/4 flyer, but yeah, this is all upside for this deck. That is exactly what we want to do. We just want to exile our own creatures, so great. Thank you, Wormfang Drake. You are yet another fantastic Fiend Hunter. Next up, how about Changeling Hero, which is a Fiend Hunter in kind of a weird way. It's a 4/4 that has champion a creature. So when it comes into play, we have to sacrifice it unless we exile another creature we control. When this leaves play, that card comes back into play. So again, championing, which is kind of hard to say, a creature can somewhat be seen as a downside sometimes, but yeah, in this case, it is all upside. Next up, a card that, well, can help us win if we just get this combo going is Yannick Scavenger Sentinel. Yannick is a 3/3 that partners with Nakara, and unfortunately we do not have black in our color identity, so we cannot use that card, but regardless, it has Vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield, we exile another creature we control until Yannick leaves the battlefield. When we do, we distribute X+1 counters among any number of target creatures where X is the exiled creature's power. So again, when we get our Fiend Hunter loop going again and again and again, if we have any other creatures in play, we can get infinite counters on them. So obviously, if we can swing and get through an opponent, they're going to be gone. But of course, we've got other quicker ways to finish off opponents, and we'll get to those here in a bit. Next up, let's talk about some other different kinds of Fiend Hunter effects with cards like Lumbering Battlement and Glorious Protector and Feldar Guardian. Lumbering Battlement has, when it enters the battlefield, exile any number of other non-token creatures you control until it leaves the battlefield. Now, Lumbering Battlement's going to get +2/+2 for each card exile with it, but that doesn't matter. The fact is, this is a Fiend Hunter, essentially, that can exile any number of our creatures. That is absolutely incredible, especially because, well, this deck is also going to utilize maybe a card like Muldrifter, which has, when it enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards. So, yeah, we can just keep choosing while we're doing our Fiend Hunter loop to also exile Muldrifter, when Lumbering Battlement comes up and then leaves and comes back. Yeah, so we can keep drawing card after card after card. Basically, with Lumbering Battlement being part of the combo, we can get infinite ETBs from whatever creatures we have that have ETBs. And essentially the exact same thing can be said about Glorious Protector, but with one caveat. Glorious Protector says when it enters the battlefield, you may exile any number of non-angel creatures you control until Glorious Protector leaves the battlefield. So yes, obviously this does not work with other angels, and there are a couple of angels that do work well in this deck, but still the vast majority of our Fiend Hunters are not angels. And the vast majority of our ETBs are not going to be angels too. You know what I mean? Next up, Feldar Guardian works in a somewhat similar yet different way. It has, when it enters the battlefield, it may exile another target permanent you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So this one just basically blinks a creature right away. It's not kind of, hunting a creature and having it in exile. That creature just comes right back. So in some circumstances, this can be even easier to combo with. I mean, if we've got another creature that can just blink a creature right away, they can both blink each other infinitely. And then if we've got anything that cares about creatures coming into play, we get that infinitely. And yeah, although it doesn't say it on the card, clones are Fiend Hunters in this deck, essentially. And of course, a clone, like the original clone, it says you may have a clone enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield. So of course, when it's entering, we just basically say, alright, yep, you're this Fiend Hunter, now exile the Fiend Hunter, and then you can just loop it. Well, again, I should say you can loop the Fiend Hunters if you've got 3 of them, or, with Feldar Guardian, you can just loop those 2 again and again and again and again and again. So yeah, plenty of clones out there that are fantastic, and actually, I probably should have mentioned this, every single card that I'm mentioning in this episode is budget-friendly, in that, at least budget-friendly in my standards, less than $1, because, again, I'm kind of building this deck right now as we speak, so these are cards I'm considering. But yeah, Mirror Image, a fantastic clone essentially for any of your creatures, costs 1 less than clone, so that's great, and Wall of Stolen Identity, yeah, it's a wall that essentially is going to have Defender, and it doesn't really matter, but yeah, it basically is a wall that clones. Can also tap a creature down, but that doesn't matter, who cares, it's a clone. Now, obviously, again, just having the Fiend Hunter loop doesn't just win us the game, but there are plenty of ways to help with that and take advantage of all of our creatures leaving the battlefield and coming back into play again and again and again and again as many times as we want. So yeah, Soul the Harvest, Garruk's Pack Leader, and Rite of Harmony are incredible in this deck. Soul the Harvest says, whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. So, essentially, again, our creatures keep entering again and again and again, so we can draw as many cards as we want. And again, that is a may, so we can stop whenever we need to. Garruk's Pack Leader is somewhat similar. It says, whenever another creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. And this is where our commander's +1/+1 counters really come into play, because it says, again, when an exiled card enters the battlefield under your control this way, put 2 ++1 counters on it. So again, when we get into that Fiend Hunter loop, as long as the creature that is coming back into play from this has at least 1 power, which again, I believe every single one that I've mentioned so far and every one that I've seen so far definitely does, it's going to come into play with 2 of those counters, and then it has 3 power, and it meets this requirement. So as long as our commander is part of this combo, we guarantee that we hit that card draw off of Garruk's Pack Leader, which is incredible. And then this next one you need to be a little more careful with, because Rite of Harmony, yes, can be fantastic, but if you're not careful, well, it can also take you out. It says, whenever a creature or enchantment enters the battlefield under your control this turn, draw a card. Notice that that does not say may, so yeah, be careful with that. Now, obviously, with this deck, if you've got ways that, you can maybe shuffle cards back in your library, or, if you decide to go like Labman wins, cool, you can do that too. But yeah, I'm not going to be going that direction. I don't think that's even budget. But yeah, just be careful with Rite of Harmony. It can be very impactful, obviously, and help you draw a ton of cards. But if you're trying to continue the loop, you don't want to mill yourself out. Moving on, one of the best ways to combo with these Fiend Hunters has got to be with Radiant Solar. It has, whenever it or another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, venture into the dungeon. So essentially with this, you infinitely venture into the dungeon. And yeah, I'm not going to go through all the dungeons and what exactly they do, but basically, you can drain your opponents out from this. I will say your most likely path is with Lost Mine of Phandelver, but if at some point, let's say that you somehow are going to be milling yourself out before you drain your opponents out, and you've got all of these treasures to cast whatever spell you want in your library, essentially, you could switch over to Tomb of Annihilation if you really need to, and then just start draining everyone out, because you also, gained life with Lost Mine. But I'm not going through the dungeons. Anyway, just trust me, you can win. Next up, how about Sage's Row Denizen, a 2/3 Vidalcan Wizard. It says, whenever another blue creature enters the battlefield under your control, target player mills 2. Now, of course, we do have some blue hunters in this deck, but yeah, our commander has blue in the color identity, so we're just going to meet that requirement with that anyways, and just mill everyone out that we want to. Which, yeah, is all of our opponents. Anyways, Blessed Sanctuary. An enchantment that says, prevent all non-combat damage to be dealt to you and creatures you control, which is just lovely. And on top of that, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, create a 2/2 white unicorn creature token. So obviously with this, infinite 2/2 unicorns. Who doesn't love that? Now, something I will say is obviously that doesn't just win you the game right then and there. But, of course, with this deck as well, we are going to take advantage of blink spells, so you could kind of have this combo basically set up and then kind of wait until right before your turn to then just do this. So you can kind of hold back and control things and protect yourself and your things on the board, and then when you're ready to combo off, do it and next turn win. Now, what might be my favorite of all these effects has got to be Theoretical Duplication, because this one utilizes your opponent's creatures getting exiled too, and I absolutely love this. It says, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control this turn, create a token that's a copy of that creature. So, here's what you do. Again, you are exiling your opponent's creatures as well with your commander when you are doing this Fiend Hunter combo, or at least I should say, you have the option to. Obviously, if you're doing this kind of a loop, you don't want to benefit your opponents. If they've got creatures with, powerful ETBs, though we'll get to some of those here in a bit where you can really use and abuse that for fun. But let's say that they've got creatures that don't have powerful ETBs and ones that you're okay with them essentially getting into play again and again and again and again. And usually that wouldn't matter if, they don't have any ETBs or LTBs. But with theoretical duplication, it again says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under opponent's control this turn, create a token that's a copy of it. So again, by essentially blinking your opponent's creatures again and again and again and again with your Fiend Hunter loop thanks to your amazing commander, you get infinite copies of all of your opponent's creatures that you want copies of. For 3 mana! So have fun winning in that, and again, you can do this at instant speed right before your turn if you maybe have this combo already kind of set up, and then you've got a way to blink one of those Fiend Hunters to get it going. Of course, another way to win though is just with Ivy Lane Denizen, a 2/3 elf warrior that says whenever another green creature enters the battlefield on your control, put a +1 counter on target creature. So again, this one's kind of like Yannick and not a Fiend Hunter itself, but this one can just get infinite counters on all the creatures that we want counters on. Because again, our commander is green. And then a somewhat similar way, we've got Champion of Lambholt, which is a 1/1, but not for long, and it says creatures with power less than Champion of Lambholt's power can't block creatures you control. And of course, on top of that, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1 counter on Champion of Lambholt. So, infinite counters on Champion of Lambholt, and your opponents can't block any of your creatures, so yeah, have fun swinging out and taking them out. And speaking of infinite power, let's talk about Heronblade Elite. It's a 1/1 Vigilant Human Warrior that says, whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1 counter on Heronblade Elite. Now, yes, we do have some Fiend Hunters that are, humans, like Fiend Hunter, but our commander is human, so yeah, as long as we're using that as part of the combo, we meet that requirement. So yeah, infinite counters on this, and of course it also can tap to add X mana of any one color where X is its power. Infinite mana of any one color, yes, thank you, please. And of course it has Vigilance, so we can also attack with that infinite power, and then just have it for mana, because why not? Another really funny interaction that I absolutely love is with Lana's Cryptozoologist, though. A 1/2 Snake Elf Scout, because that's a thing, that says whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, investigate. And by tapping it to sacrifice X clues, we have target opponent reveal the top X cards of their library. We can put a non-land permanent card with mana value X or less among them on the battlefield under our control. That player puts the rest on the bottom of their library in a random order. This is quite funny. So again, with that infinite Fiend Hunter loop, we make infinite clues with this, and then we can tap and sacrifice as many clues as we want to, essentially just equal to the number of cards in an opponent's library, look through their entire library, and get whatever permanent we want into play. Or I should say, non-land, but yeah, we can get some pretty spicy things. Let's hope they've got a Blightsteel Colossus. And of course, just having an infinite amount of clues in play is also just nice to have, in case we actually want to just, draw some cards with that. But yeah, my plan is every single turn just tutoring out whatever I want from an opponent's library. Next up, a very easy way to just take advantage of this Fiend Hunter loop in these colors is just to gain infinite life with things like Lunarch Veteran, Impassioned Order, and Daxos. Lunarch Veteran simply says, whenever the creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life, and Impassioned Order says the exact same thing. And then Daxos, Blessed by the Sun, says, whenever the creature you control enters the battlefield or dies, you gain 1 life. So obviously this does benefit us when our creatures die, but more importantly, yeah, if we're looping our Fiend Hunters, we are gaining infinite life. Now, obviously, that doesn't win you the game, but it can just, pad your life total to an absurd amount where you can't be taken out by a lot of normal means, and yeah, you can just hold off your opponents long enough to win in a different way. Now, really quick, what might be my favorite way to win with this commander is to utilize an opponent's creature against them. Now, Cloudblazer is a fantastic card in this deck because, again, if we've got, one of those lumbering battlement kind of combos going on, we can blink this as many times as we want to gain 2 life and draw 2 cards repeatedly. That being said, it's also a very popular card in other decks as well, like, blink decks, and if one of our opponents has this in play, they're in big trouble. Because if they have this in play, again, with our commander, we can choose to blink that infinitely. Again, essentially, Fiend Hunter blink, whatever you want to call it. And when we do that, that player just gains a ton of life. Good for them! But they're also forced to draw 2 cards. This is not a May. So because that, blink player decided to love their value engine Cloudblazer, unfortunately, we're going to make it a bit too efficient for them, and they're going to mill out and lose. And obviously the exact same thing can be said for Baleful Strix, which is a fantastic card with fantastic art, a 1/1 bird with flying and death touch that has when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Again, that is not a May, so this player is going to draw out their entire library and lose. And then how about Risen Reef? You know, if you're playing against an elemental tribal deck, or maybe a deck that likes to abuse, you know, ETBs or clone things, etc., etc., etc. A 1/1 elemental that says, whenever it or another elemental enters the battlefield under your control, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may put it onto the battlefield tapped. If you don't put the card onto the battlefield, put it into your hand. Simic players absolutely love ramping and drawing, right? Well, not in this case, because sure, you got all your lands into play from your library, but you're also got your entire library in your hand, and that's a good thing, right? Oh no, you milled and lost. Oh darn. But now as this episode is coming to a close, it's time for me to give you my final thoughts on Lagrella the Magpie. Yeah, to say I'm excited about this commander is an understatement. I absolutely love this commander. This is the perfect commander for my Fiend Hunter Tribal, whatever I'm calling it. Deck that, again, had, you know, good commanders for it, great options for it, but this one is perfect. This fits perfectly. We've got a Fiend Hunter in the command zone that can even utilize our opponent's creatures against them in some circumstances, and I love that. So, as you can tell, I'm very excited about this card, and there are plenty of other exciting spoilers, so make sure you check out those. And yeah, make sure you're staying tuned for more exciting spoilers and more exciting quick takes coming up as well. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thank you again, and have a good one.